So now we're going to have a look at pitch in a little bit more detail, and more specifically ask the question, can we find a good way for talking about how far apart in terms of pitch two notes are? So imagine we had this note here, it sounds like this, and this note here, it sounds like this. Now whether we play them separately or together, those two notes are a certain distance apart. And over the next few videos we're going to look at a useful way of describing that relationship between the two notes. We call the distance between two pitches an interval, and just the same way that an interval comes in the middle of a play or a football match, and it's between the two halves of the play or the football match, just the same way here in music we're asking, well, what is the distance between the two notes that we're looking at? And the distance between them is what we call the interval between those two notes. Actually, as it happens, you already know one name for a particular type of interval, one particular distance between two notes, and that is an octave. You remember that when we just started learning about pitch, we said that an octave is quite an important relationship between two notes. They have the same letter name, that's how important it is, so we almost kind of use it as a basic measurement of pitch. And something that's interesting about octaves is that as we move them around and make sure the notes are the same distance apart in terms of semitones or in terms of distance on our piano keyboard, you'll find that the effect is the same. Yes, they go up and down in terms of their general pitch, but the relationship kind of sounds similar. So these two notes kind of sound like two flavours of the same thing, and I'd say the same was true of these two notes. They have that same relationship, and that's what we find with intervals in general, is that no matter where we move them, up and down in terms of pitch or in terms of our piano keyboard, the sound that we're going to hear and the relationship they have to one another is actually very similar sounding. A really important part of developing our ears as musicians is to become really good at naming and even identifying with our ears different intervals, because it gives us a good understanding of how melodies are put together and even how more complex musical structures work. So let's get started with exploring some more of these interval relationships between pairs of notes. We've already got our octave, and that has a very distinctive sound. Hopefully that's becoming pretty familiar. And I'm going to add another one into the mix, and that is a fifth. Now you might have noticed that both of these terms, octave and fifth, relate to numbers in some way. You know that the octopus has 8 legs, and equally fifth means the fifth thing in the sequence, I suppose. And it's not a coincidence that these names do relate to numbers, because these numbers are actually the number of keys that we have to count through, or the number of letter names that we have to count through to go from the lower note in our interval to the upper note. Now the thing about intervals, which might be different to some of the other things we've done so far, is that when we're looking at two notes and we're counting from one to the other, we always count the top and the bottom notes as part of our interval. So as a demonstration, I'm going to play you an octave. Here's a bottom C and here's a top C, and I'm going to count the numbers of letter names or notes, white notes, that we have to go through to go from that bottom C to the top C. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So because there are 8 notes counting the bottom and top between our low C and high C, we call that an octave. And so, very logically, if we want to find a fifth, if we want to find the note that is a fifth away from our C here, we need to do the same thing, but just count up to 5. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remembering we count the bottom and top notes in our 5 notes. Here is our interval of a fifth, and here it is C and G. So let's just have a quick listen to the fifth. It does sound quite different to an octave. I feel it sounds a bit harsher and a bit barer than that octave. Octaves to me sound very clear and clean. There's our octave. Here's our fifth. You can hear some overtones if you're very, very good at listening deeply between the notes. You'll hear other sounds as well, and that's what gives the fifth a bit of a bare character. Just like with the octave, the way we could move the octave around as long as we kept the same number of notes in between the top and the bottom, we can do the same thing with a fifth. So here's a G, and remember counting the bottom and top notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll hear again, that's our sound of a fifth. So we'll stop there for now. That's an introduction to intervals. In other words, trying to talk about the distance in pitch between two notes, and let's have a go at trying to recognise some intervals of an octave and some intervals of a fifth.